In the quiet town of Alton, Illinois, the stillness of a summer night was broken by sounds no neighbor ever wants to hear. It started softly, muffled, like a cry pressed behind a hand. Then it grew louder, sharper, echoing through the thin walls of an apartment building. The thuds followed, rhythmic and violent, shaking the very floors. Neighbors would later describe it as the sound of chopping wood, though deep down they knew it was something much darker. What unfolded behind that door was so disturbing, so grotesque, that it left even seasoned investigators shaken. This is the story of Lisa Dodd, a young woman who should have been preparing to welcome new life into the world, but instead became the victim of one of the most horrifying crimes ever to strike this Illinois community. A crime too disturbing even for Netflix. Viewer discretion is advised. Lisa Dodd was 22 years old and 8 months pregnant. Her baby, lovingly nicknamed Baby Bean by her family, was due in just a few weeks. Lisa's life, like so many young women, was filled with hope and fear in equal measure. She was a small-town girl, born and raised in Madison County, with dreams of building a career in the medical field and creating a loving home for her child. Friends remembered her as a bright, empathetic soul, the kind of person who, for her 10th birthday, organized a fundraiser for a local animal shelter instead of asking for gifts. Her kindness and warmth were unmistakable. But behind the smiles, Lisa's world was complicated, tangled in the grip of a relationship that had spiraled out of control. Her boyfriend was DeAndre Holloway, the same age as Lisa, a man who carried the weight of his troubled upbringing like a shadow. Their relationship was turbulent from the beginning. Friends, co-workers, and family all saw the warning signs. Lisa often came to work with black eyes or bruises, offering flimsy excuses about a dog jumping up on her. Her boss at Dairy Queen once even witnessed DeAndre strike her in the face. The pattern was clear. Arguments, violence, reconciliations, and then the cycle would begin again. On more than one occasion, Lisa confided to her boss and her mother that she was afraid for her safety. In one message, she admitted, "My boyfriend beat me again, and I had to go to my mom's. They're wanting me to stay in a safe place because he's threatened before to harm us." Yet, like so many victims trapped in toxic cycles of abuse, she always returned. By June 2022, Lisa and DeAndre were living together in an apartment complex in Alton. Lisa was trying to hold everything together, her pregnancy, her job, her relationship, but the cracks were widening. In the days leading up to her death, those closest to her could sense the growing tension. DeAndre had been spiraling, sending messages to friends about his emotions boiling over, confessing he didn't know how to manage his anger without snapping. Lisa, too, was faltering. In one late-night text to her mother, she admitted she had cut herself in despair. It was as if both of them were standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the inevitable fall. On June 7th, DeAndre vanished without explanation. Lisa returned home to find his things gone, his phone left behind. Confused and anxious, she texted her mom, "You think he'd just leave like this?" She feared he'd left for good, abandoning her just weeks before the baby was due. Her mom, Heidi, tried to comfort her, suggesting maybe this was a blessing in disguise, that perhaps Lisa was finally free. Lisa wasn't ready to see it that way. She was still tied to him emotionally, still tethered by the hope that he might come back. And come back he did. On the evening of June 8th, DeAndre's uncle contacted Lisa, telling her he was bringing DeAndre back. Against her mother's warnings, Lisa went to pick him up. Surveillance footage captured them returning to the apartment at 9:11 p.m. Lisa sent her mother one final text from the car. "I'm trying to figure it out." That was the last time anyone would hear from her. Less than 2 hours later, her life, and the life of her unborn daughter, would be brutally taken. Inside the apartment, neighbors heard it all. At first, muffled yelling. Then the apartment shook with violent movement. At around 9:45 p.m., the screaming intensified, raw and agonized, before being cut off by a series of heavy, deliberate thuds. Thud after thud, steady and rhythmic, until silence returned. That silence was more terrifying than the noise. Upstairs, Lisa was gone, her head severed from her body in a fit of unimaginable violence. The man she trusted, the father of her unborn child, had killed her in one of the most gruesome ways imaginable. At 11:57 p.m., DeAndre emerged on camera again. He was calm, collected, carrying a white laundry basket. He walked behind a smoke shop, disappearing from view, the basket in hand. What was inside wouldn't be discovered until later. Lisa's head. DeAndre had decapitated his pregnant girlfriend and placed her remains in a laundry basket, discarding them like trash in a nearby dumpster. He returned to the apartment, changed clothes, and left once more, walking off into the night as if nothing had happened. Hours later, he showed up at his family's home, cutting off his dreadlocks in the bathroom, muttering about wanting a fresh start. He handed his grandmother Lisa's ID, her debit card, her keys, clues he couldn't explain, tokens of the crime he had just committed. By the next afternoon, June 9th, Lisa's mother grew frantic. She hadn't heard from her daughter in more than 15 hours. At 1 p.m., she arrived at Lisa's apartment, letting herself in. 2 minutes later, she staggered back outside, pale and shaking, dialing 911 in a voice filled with anguish. "My daughter's chopped. My daughter's head's been chopped off." The responding officers rushed upstairs, only to find a scene so gruesome that some had to steady themselves. Lisa's body lay in her bedroom, her head missing, her hand resting on a pregnancy book, as though her last moments had been spent thinking of her unborn child. The head would later be found in the dumpster, inside the basket her killer had carried into the night. The community of Alton was shaken to its core. A young mother-to-be, murdered and mutilated in her own home, her baby's life stolen before it could even begin. The brutality stunned even hardened detectives. How had it come to this? How could someone commit an act so violent, so dehumanizing, against the woman he once claimed to love? Investigators quickly pieced together the timeline. Surveillance cameras confirmed what Lisa's neighbors had heard. At 9:11 p.m., Lisa and DeAndre returned home together. Less than an hour later, the screams and the violent thuds began. By 11:57, DeAndre was carrying the laundry basket out the door, his clothing changed, his face partially covered. At 12:01 a.m., the basket was tossed into a dumpster behind the smoke shop, swallowed up by shadows and discarded construction debris. Just 2 hours later, Lisa's car was missing from the apartment complex lot. DeAndre had driven it to his mother's house and parked it with a crude handwritten "for sale" sign in the window, as though erasing Lisa from her own life. At his family's home, DeAndre's behavior alarmed those around him. His sister PJ recalled him pacing nervously, his dreadlocks, hair he had cherished for years, cut off and discarded in the trash. He asked his mother for fresh clothes, stripping off the hoodie and pants he had worn during the killing, leaving them on the bathroom floor. When his grandmother questioned why he was carrying Lisa's ID and debit card, he had no answer. He handed her the items with a blank expression, saying only that he had found them on the ground. He gave her Lisa's keys too, telling her to get them back to her, though Lisa was already gone. The family noticed another unsettling detail. He had arrived at 2:30 a.m. in Lisa's black car, but without Lisa. It didn't make sense. He appeared agitated, shifting from nervous energy to eerie calm, muttering about a fresh start. When asked what he was planning to do that day, he said only that he was going to cut grass before leaving on foot around midday. To his family, it was clear something terrible had happened, but the full horror was still unknown. Meanwhile, across town, Lisa's mother Heidi was pacing her own living room, waiting for her daughter to answer the phone. She tried texting, calling, messaging, nothing. By 1 p.m., her maternal instincts screamed that something was wrong. She drove to Lisa's apartment, heart pounding, only to find silence behind the door. Letting herself inside, she discovered a scene no mother should ever see. She stumbled back outside in shock, trembling as she called 911. Her voice broke as she told the dispatcher, "My daughter's killed. My daughter's head is gone." Police officers who rushed to the apartment confirmed the unthinkable. Lisa's body lay on her bed, headless, wrapped partially in a towel. Her unborn child, too, was lifeless. The brutality was staggering. For the officers on scene, it was a nightmare made real. They had prepared themselves for violence, but not for the sheer savagery of what they found. Lisa's head was missing, the weapon nowhere to be seen. The apartment itself bore signs of struggle, echoes of the sounds neighbors had heard the night before. But what haunted investigators most was the intimacy of the crime. This wasn't random. This wasn't opportunistic. It was personal, deliberate, and carried out with a level of violence that defied comprehension. Neighbors later admitted they had almost called the police the night before. The muffled screams, the shaking walls, the rhythmic thuds, they had all been there. One neighbor even texted the landlord to say, "We heard screaming for like 5 minutes straight, then thumping again." But when the noise stopped, they assumed it was over. They assumed Lisa had survived another fight. They couldn't have known it had already ended in murder. Detectives quickly zeroed in on DeAndre. Heidi herself told 911 dispatchers she knew who had done this. "My daughter's boyfriend killed her. He chopped her head off," she said through sobs. She didn't need proof. She had seen the cycle of violence escalate for months. She had feared it would end this way, and now her worst nightmare had come true. By the evening of June 9th, investigators executed a search warrant on DeAndre's mother's house. In the trash outside, they found the discarded clothing DeAndre had worn that night and his dreadlocks, shorn off and wrapped in toilet paper. His attempt at a fresh start was nothing more than a feeble attempt to erase evidence. But DeAndre himself was gone. For a brief moment, it seemed a manhunt would be necessary. Then, in the early hours of June 10th, a call came in from Gillespie, Illinois. Local police there had arrested a restless, uncooperative young man on a minor cannabis possession charge. They quickly realized who he was: DeAndre Holloway. In custody, DeAndre behaved erratically. He refused to give his name, pacing the room in handcuffs, taunting officers, banging his head against the wall. At times he laughed, at times he muttered, at times he grew combative. When investigators from Alton arrived, he offered nothing: no confession, no explanation, not even his name. He asked for a lawyer, and the interview ended. The silence was deafening, but the evidence was overwhelming. Within days, prosecutors charged him with 2 counts of first-degree murder, intentional homicide of an unborn child, concealment of a homicidal death, and other related offenses. His bond was set at $2 million. The case left the community in shock. Lisa wasn't just another statistic. She was a daughter, a friend, a young mother-to-be. She had dreams of a future in the medical field, dreams of raising her little girl, dreams that ended violently in her own bedroom. At vigils held in her memory, friends and neighbors spoke of her compassion, her warmth, her infectious smile. Her death became a rallying cry against domestic violence, a grim reminder of the dangers victims face when trapped in abusive relationships. Even DeAndre's family expressed their disbelief. His stepfather, Chris Hawk, released a video on YouTube offering condolences to Lisa's family. His voice trembled as he spoke. What happened was an extreme act of evil. I don't know how else to explain it. We are ashamed. We knew he was capable of violence, but we never saw this coming. We tried to get help for him for years, but the system failed. He's not a monster. What he did was monstrous, but he's not a monster. He described a young man plagued by mental illness, failed by the very structures meant to protect him and those around him. Yet no amount of explanation could soften the reality. Lisa and her baby were gone, brutally taken. In the months that followed, DeAndre was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial. He was sent to a state institution for treatment until he could regain competency. While legal proceedings crawled forward, Lisa's family grieved. Her mother Heidi spoke with raw honesty, saying, quote, "This didn't have to end this way. My daughter should be here raising her toddler instead of being a casualty of domestic violence." She urged others in abusive relationships to see the warning signs, to believe threats, and to seek safety before it's too late. Her words echoed with the pain of lived experience. As the investigation unfolded, the weight of evidence against DeAndre was undeniable. Surveillance footage showed him carrying the laundry basket into the night. His family confirmed he had arrived at their home in Lisa's car with her belongings in his pockets. His discarded dreadlocks and blood-stained clothing were recovered from the trash outside his mother's house. And in a nearby dumpster, inside that white laundry basket, police discovered the missing piece of the horror: Lisa's severed head. The brutality was staggering, the evidence airtight. The only question left was how the justice system would handle a man whose mental state seemed to unravel before their eyes. DeAndre's behavior in custody was volatile. He refused to attend hearings, cursed at correctional officers, and even threatened to decapitate them, echoing the crime he had already committed. At one point, he told guards, "I'll cut your head off." His refusal to cooperate with court appearances led to him being forcibly restrained and wheeled into sessions. Eventually, doctors ruled him unfit to stand trial, and he was transferred to a state psychiatric facility until his competency could be restored. For Lisa's grieving family, the delays were agonizing. Justice felt distant, tied up in the question of DeAndre's mental state. Yet they remained steadfast, attending hearings, pushing for answers, determined that Lisa's voice, and the voice of her unborn daughter, would not be lost in the shuffle. For months, the case hung in limbo. Then, in January of 2024, a breakthrough. DeAndre regained competency. Court proceedings resumed, and prosecutors prepared to hold him accountable. The legal complexities were many. The Illinois Supreme Court had recently ruled that an unborn child could not be counted as a second murder victim for the purpose of life sentencing. This ruling would limit the charges prosecutors could pursue. Still, they were determined to secure the maximum possible punishment. The community watched closely, their grief and outrage simmering as each new court date approached. Finally, in January of 2025, DeAndre Holloway entered a guilty plea. In a courtroom heavy with tension, the judge handed down a sentence of 60 years in prison. It was a composite of charges: 30 years for murder, 20 years for homicide, 10 years for concealment of a homicidal death, all to be served consecutively. He would have to serve at least 52 years before even being considered for release. For Lisa's family, it wasn't enough to bring her back, but it was something. Her mother Heidi, standing strong in court, delivered words that cut through the silence. This is a tragic outcome of a 2-year on-and-off domestic violence relationship. This didn't have to end this way. My daughter should be here raising her toddler, instead of being a casualty of domestic violence. Her words were not just directed at DeAndre. They were a warning to anyone listening. A plea to recognize the signs, to take threats seriously, to understand that cycles of abuse rarely end peacefully. Heidi continued, "If you are in a domestic violence relationship, if someone is emotionally, mentally, or physically abusing you, make a safe plan to leave that relationship. If they continually disrespect your boundaries, make demeaning comments, and control your every movement, this is abuse. If someone threatens to end your life, believe them. If they can say it, they can do it. Reach out. Your life depends on it." Her strength that day inspired everyone in the room. Even prosecutors and law enforcement officers who had seen countless cases of violence remarked on her composure, her grace, her resolve to turn unimaginable loss into a message that might save others. One official later said, quote, "Lisa's last act was resting her hand on a book about pregnancy. Her last thought was probably about her unborn child. There's beauty in that, even in the horror, and her mother's strength keeps that beauty alive." Outside the courtroom, community members left flowers, candles, and handwritten notes at makeshift memorials for Lisa and baby Bean. Vigils were held, not only to mourn, but to rally for change. The case became a painful but powerful reminder of the deadly consequences of domestic violence, especially when ignored or minimized. Advocates pointed out that Lisa had reached out for help, that she had spoken of threats, that she had shown visible signs of abuse, yet, like so many victims, she hadn't been able to break free. Her story, now told in newspapers, television reports, and community meetings, carried a simple but urgent message: we cannot wait until it's too late. As DeAndre began his decades-long sentence, locked away from the community he had terrorized, Lisa's family sought healing through action. The GoFundMe page, originally created to cover funeral costs, shifted its purpose. Donations, which had reached over $16,000, were pledged to local domestic violence resources. Heidi wrote in an update, "This sentence brings some resolution to a heinous crime. No sentence will bring my daughter or granddaughter back, but this ensures he won't hurt anyone else. We will honor Lisa by helping others escape what she could not." It was a gesture of resilience, turning grief into advocacy, pain into protection for others. For those who knew Lisa personally, memories of her kindness still shine brightest. Friends recalled her laughter, her compassion, her habit of always putting others first. On her social media, she once shared a poem about resilience. "After a while, you learn the subtle difference between holding a hand and chaining a soul. You learn to build all your roads on today, because tomorrow's ground is too uncertain for plans." The words now feel hauntingly prophetic. A glimpse into the mind of a young woman who yearned for freedom, for love, for a life she never got the chance to live. Her legacy, however, remains. A legacy of strength, of compassion, and of a community determined not to let her story fade. This case is one of the most disturbing to ever come out of Illinois, not only for its brutality, but for its warning. It teaches us that the signs of abuse are often clear, long before the final act of violence. Bruises explained away as accidents, threats dismissed as empty words, tears hidden behind smiles. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a pattern that too often ends in tragedy. Lisa's story demands we pay attention, that we listen, that we act before it's too late. And so, as this documentary closes, the message is simple but vital. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, do not wait. Do not assume it will get better. Do not ignore the threats. Reach out to friends, to family, to resources in your community. Call hotlines. Make a safety plan. Your life, and the lives of those you love, are worth protecting. Lisa Dodd deserved the chance to raise her daughter, to live her dreams, to see her future. That chance was stolen. But by telling her story, by refusing to let her name be forgotten, perhaps others can be saved. This is not just Lisa's story. It is a call to action. Break the silence. Believe the threats. Leave before it's too late, because tomorrow is never guaranteed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this documentary compelling, Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more true crime stories, and share it with others who follow these haunting cases. Until next time, stay safe and take care.